Eric Levy need not have died. He was put on nil by mouth. He had been eating only 2 days before because Jill had been feeding him and the hospital had been neglecting him. It is a crime and it is not isolated.
He was such a fit and healthy 94-year-old man. I've never known such an old man to have so much energy. He came into this hospital with such minor injuries and he's now sadly passed away. So whatever's happened between that time, we need to investigate.
He was only brought in because he had a knock to the head and they were just sending him in to make sure he didn't have any internal bleeding. 13 weeks later, he was still in here. Every week, Eric wanted to go home and sign himself out, and they would make excuses.
A lot of people, old people, have been dying prematurely when they're under the care of the NHS.
He has so many supporters around the world and we will not let this drop. These nurses that were meant to be caring for Eric, they seem to have more energy in turning people away out of the ward than actually putting that energy into caring for him. I remember when I went to see him one day, as Jill said, the blinds were shut. He was laid down in his bed and they had left out a hard jacket potato for him. I actually prodded it and it was rock solid. So you tell me how a 94-year-old man is meant to eat a jacket potato they haven't even cut up for him. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
Is this a lawsuit?
Absolutely. We are going to push this to the full extent of the law. Not only that, we are going to make sure that there's legislation in place that means this is not going to happen again. Do you know how many people come up to me on the streets with the signs? Yesterday I had a sign that said killed by nil by mouth, and all of these people were coming up to me in tears saying, they did that to my mother. They did that to my father. They did that to my friend's mother. Everybody had a story. Everybody had a story. Now that is just too much to be coincidental.
People really need to know what's going on concerning this ruthless assault on old people simply for the crime of being, you could call it useless eaters. I don't think that the death of Eric Levy was a politically motivated murder, because it seems to be pretty much standard behavior for anybody who's very old, very vulnerable and very frail, and Eric was 94, and irrespective of his beliefs, and he was very much a thorn in the side of the establishment, and he was always active, challenging the state and challenging state policies on a number of issues. He was a political radical. He was very principled. He was very noble. He was very idealistic, and these qualities were great, and they represented something that we should all aspire to. Unfortunately, he managed to get into his mid-90s, and I think the policy of the state for people of that age is to basically get rid of them, which is horrifying and shocking. And I didn't realize the extent of this policy of nil by mouth until I did some research into it. And I think it's fair to say that even in the Third Reich, with their appalling and vicious attitude towards human life based on nationality and based on race and based on religion, I don't think they had a policy of systematically getting rid of people just because they were old. And the fact that even the Third Reich, as far as I'm aware, respected the dignity of age, and yet we do not. What conclusions must we come to about how degraded and degenerate our state has become?
I had a lovely girl earlier, Esther, come up to me and speak to me, and she started crying, and she said that her friend's dad sadly passed away in this hospital, and they actually sued this hospital because a similar situation has happened. So this has happened to so many people.
I think it's happening a lot. I think it's happening right now, and I think it's not just Eric Levy who has been effectively murdered this week through the withdrawal of food and liquid, but also other people. I think we may never know the extent of this relentless campaign of, well, it's not genocide, it's democide, because it's targeting a particular group in society. I think, as the Chinese saying goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And by having this single step of mobilizing here today and presenting to the public a demonstration and hopefully a campaign of awareness, which dozens of people so far have stopped and asked what this is about. So we are making progress, but we need to intensify this and develop it, and we need to do it on a daily basis, not just here, but in front of other hospitals as well.
They would have an excuse every week. People say, well, how could he have been here 12, 13 weeks? All he did was get a bump on his head because he fell backwards, because he had building work going on in his flat. And for that, they kept him in for 12, 13 weeks. So we knew every week he had to come out or he's going to get worse, but they lied to us every week and said, oh, he's going to be discharged next week. We're just going to do his bloods on Monday, and it looks good, so he'll probably be discharged Thursday. And then, magically, there's another thing that came up every week that prevented him. He said he wanted to sign himself out. They lied to us and said he's got an MCA, saying he's not of sound mind. But there was no MCA. I kept asking for this mental capacity assessment form, which they say he failed. I said, I want to see it. What doctor signed it and what was the date? They could never produce it for me. So they threatened him and told him he couldn't sign himself out on false pretenses.
Do you think this is a problem of hospital administration as well, that the administration boards have taken over the hospital and is telling doctors and nurses what to do and then just doing it unquestionably?
Right, well, if that's the case, then it would shift the blame from the medical profession, practicing doctors and nurses, who ought to be held accountable for making unethical and immoral decisions against patients. If it's not those people who are initiating this vile and brutal policy, but rather the bureaucrats and the administrators, that doesn't make them any less complicit or any less liable. But what it does suggest is that massive pressure and coercion has been applied on doctors and nurses in order to carry out an inhuman policy. I like to think, having been somebody who was rather idealistic about many aspects of British society until Covidism appeared 2 years ago, I like to think that it's not a policy that has been pushed forward and initiated by medical practitioners themselves, but rather the godless and soulless and ruthless bureaucrats who give them instructions.
The death rate for these kind of things is huge, and I call it geriatric genocide. Anybody over 60, and this is all in NHS reports you can find. There's a report called Palliative Care Funding Review, written in 2010, commissioned by the current health secretary at the time, Department of Health Minister. And that report was the blueprint for our current palliative care system, which is end-of-life care, which is the genocide path to get rid of people as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible. So they have incentives if you identify somebody in their 60s, for example, and get them into palliative care. And they're choosing your death time for you. They're not asking you, they're not informing you. They are leading you down a pathway, and they get cash for their surgery, they get facilities, they get new equipment or new staff, different incentives that make them do this, so they get their budgets increased. They don't actually have a number like, oh, £500 if you get that guy killed. They're not so stupid to have that. But it's all in this report written by, there's 3 authors that were on the staff at King's College Hospital, where Rob George used to be after he left 20 years here at UCLH, where he, as a eugenist, created the palliative care pathway to death. That was his baby from 1987 till 2001. Then he went to King's College. Now he travels around the world giving talks, educating hospitals how they can do what he does. And he brags. There's a talk of him in New Zealand addressing a professional body. And he says he himself has supervised more than 26,000 deaths. More than 26,000. He's on a YouTube video saying it. So if a lot of searching would find Rob George, Professor Rob George, and him addressing hospital staff in New Zealand on how to set up their palliative care programs. So this is once again the eugenists in charge about reducing the population. And the most costly people in any society are the ones that A, don't pay income tax, B, use the national health system the most, and C, they're actually needing carers or care homes, which are much more expensive than just housing a 20-year-old that needs assistance. So housing older people and giving them their pensions, and they don't contribute any income tax, you know, those are the most expensive people. So they see those people as having no place in society, or they're expendable, put it that way.
I've got a very strong feeling my father was taken out in exactly the same way, and I've only just realised. I was with my father just before he died, and there was something very, very strange. So I also agree, if you're elderly, stay on the sun lounger, find someone who knows about plant medicine, get a massage, do a bit of fasting, not too much, tell jokes, get yourself laughing. Do not go into these buildings.
Eric was killed here. I saw him the day before he was killed, which is why we moved the action forward to yesterday to be here, because he was so frail. And when I saw above his bed the sign "nil by mouth," I asked them, how? Look at the state of this man. He was emaciated. I said he needs to gain weight, not lose weight. You don't put him on a nil by mouth. He's not going for surgery. You do not put him on that and expect him to do well. Oh no, he's not well at the moment. We're helping him by putting him on nil by mouth.
Is that what they said?
That's what they said. They totally were trying to make me believe that they were helping him. And I said, look, I know that's not true. You got a bag of paracetamol there, and the paracetamol is very dangerous to people. They were giving him paracetamol all the time, and I kept asking them, he's not in pain. Why do you keep giving him pain medicine when he doesn't need it? They would ask him, can I give you this? And he would look at me, and I'd say, well, if you need it, you need it. But if you don't take any drugs you don't want. Because he had a blood clot from in December. After that, he suddenly developed a blood clot, which he never had before. So I'm only telling you what happened. You can draw your own conclusions. And so they were putting him on blood thinners because they said he had that blood clot. So that's all the medication. Eric is a 94-year-old man, never had any prescription drugs. He didn't need any. He was fine. He was out with everybody 8 hours.
He was high on the truth.
That's right, he was high on the truth.
We're not here just for Eric Levy. Yes, he was an amazing man and we'll continue to fight for him, but we're here for other families. We're here for other people. We've had multiple people come up to us and say that their families have gone through the same or similar situations. So we've had a young lady pass saying that we should be talking about death and things like this when people got to come to a hospital, but this is reality.
I'd just like to say how horrified and shocked I am that a society which was, in my view, relatively democratic, relatively free and more or less liberal until the onslaught of Covidism, that's how I felt, that we could now sink to such a degraded level of state institutionalized mass murder. I didn't think I would see this in my lifetime. It's an absolute nightmare.
Eric had a lifelong time with activism. He's been a freedom fighter from his young days. I'd say probably in his 20s he started his quest to try and be a better influence on the world, to bring about more freedom and more justice, and visit as many countries that were experiencing repression and some of them genocide or victims of wars that were just killing off the populations. He went everywhere around the world. He was in the Congo, he was a human shield in Iraq during the war, protecting the Iraqi people, standing in front of their doorways saying, you'll have to kill me first before you're going to kill them. And you know, this was Eric's way. He put everything on the line. He lived very humbly, and he gave his life to this, to seeking out freedom and justice. And he was a substitute teacher. I think you call them supply teachers. So, you know, when I was helping him with things and I saw his little pension, I was like, substitute teacher. So you were a supply teacher. Not many people know, but Eric was a teacher in schools. And I'm really happy about that, because he will have taught some of those children his ethics about how to be in the world and how it's not all about just making money. So Eric walked the walk and he talked the talk. He wasn't a phony. You know, Eric he would go to the wall for whatever he believed in, and he would tell you he would die for you because he believed in you so much. And if he saw you in trouble, he would come up to you and he would get arrested with you rather than let you do something on your own and be distressed.
Eric Levy was a man of justice, of truth, and this is what he invested his heart in, was fighting for truth and justice. So we will fight for truth and justice for him as well. So
yes.
Rest in power, Eric Levy. We all love you, and we thank you for what you did for Julian Assange.
Brilliant.